Hello, so it's Michael here, and today we're going to do something a little bit special. So I'm currently in a project, so it's a project that I'm currently assisting on. There's a few things in it that kind of need to be recreated for various reasons, and I thought it would be a great opportunity to kind of show you what it does, and then kind of go over how it is I would essentially recreate it, which is what I'm going to be doing. So it's not a tutorial per se, but I'm going to try and sort of bring you along for lots of that sort of process. So first of all, do have this sort of entrance area. So this is not the bit that we're going to be recreating. But if we come out here, you have some items. Inventory, and then you can open the inventory. Do apologise. So background noise, all of these up. Then you can kind of see these items in. We have this preview where we can see the item there. And we have some category options. So this one, probably able to demonstrate.
Hello, crew. This is Amelia listening. Please take note of the following announcement. Operations procedures. The briefing for the electrical maintenance team will take place at
Resources. Again, it kind of all comes through when it's sort of takes accordingly.
Today.
Now I'm just going to close out that to stop the sound. Now, the issue is the way that it's actually set up isn't really fit for this particular type of project. So there's quite a few things that we're kind of wanting to be able to do, and with the current system, it's just not. It would take more work to try and put those features in than it would be just to recreate the system. So that's kind of what we're going to be doing. So what I will do, I can quickly open up the main component. There it is. So this is the main infantry components. This is kind of how it works. So at the moment it's based on structures essentially. So if I was to add an element here, we have a list of all these different variables. Now, the issue that we kind of have is that we have a lot of data in here that really shouldn't be in here. Things such as the powder A, B and C and the Medigel. So this is stuff that's more specific for crafting. Now, because of the way that it is set up, it means that things like resources that wouldn't really have any damage values or fire rates, things like that, this data is still in there as well. So it can get quite messy, especially when we're trying to create new items on the fly. One example that we can give. So over here on the sort of crate, so this isn't a system I've set up, but as an attempt to create essentially a container, you have all these particular options that you have to then specify. So it gets quite messy when it comes to creating new items and moving them about. And because of the complex nature that kind of wanting, the whole system does kind of need to be recreated. So as an example, this is one of the functions for attempting to add an item. Obviously it works, but it's gotten to the point where it's quite convoluted, and there's like specific edge cases in here, like this one here, that as the project continues to grow, it's just not going to be manageable in any meaningful way. To get to the point where you probably want to bang your head on the keyboard whenever you need to change anything. So again, there's quite a lot of functions in here. Some of them are sort of slight variations on other functions. So there's a few that I've already created in an attempt and sort of shown a quick example. But yeah, of course it's quite a messy approach. So I have already started the remake. Now there is a tutorial series on my channel for an infantry system, so it's kind of the approach that I sort of prefer. As with all inventories, there are pros and cons, so it is a case of looking at the different types, whether it's using a structure-based inventory system, which is the one that's currently implemented in this game, whether or not you use something like a U-object-based or even just an actor-based inventory system. Again, all depending on the sort of game that you're making, and it's just a case of figuring out what sort of helps provide the needs of your particular project. Now, this is a single player game, so I don't need to worry about replication or anything like that. So whilst you can technically replicate U-objects, which is what these are here, and is what I show how to create in my tutorial series, replicating them tends to be a lot easier in C++, which, you know, in a blueprint-only project might not be an option. But again, this particular project is single player, so it's not necessarily anything I need to be thinking about, certainly not at this stage anyway. Now, what I've already created is, this is just a U object, and all I've done is just started populating some of the data in there. So these are all the variables that I feel, based on what's in the current system, kind of needs to be in there for every single item. I've then gone ahead and created some child items based on that base. So we have ammo, consumable, resource, weapons, and then we have a long and short weapon. So you can think of short weapons like handguns, and then long weapons are more for things like rifles. If I open up the weapon, again you can see the additional variables that have been added in here. Now this is quite nice because it means that things like resources don't have all that additional data. Let me just show the inherited variables. Yeah, so as you can see, all these resources, they don't have all the extra stuff that was in there for things like the weapon or the ammo. So it kind of helps streamline things a little bit already just because of that. Now, what I need to do now is actually start setting up some of the functions and things like that. So I thought I would sort of bring you along for the ride a little bit. So in terms of a lot of these functions, a lot of the data would be static, so it wouldn't actually ever change at runtime. If all your data is always going to be static for your items, then you may want to consider using data assets instead of your objects. Because that way it'll be the same for every single item regardless. But in this particular project, there are going to be a handful of things that might have sort of data that potentially changes. So using U-objects just helps make that a little bit easier. At a later date, we could potentially incorporate some data assets into this for some of the data. But again, it's not kind of necessary at this particular stage. Just a few things to note. A lot of the things like the meshes, the sounds, textures, things like that, these are all soft references. And the reason why is because if they're stored in the inventory and not actually being used, then we may not actually need them to be loaded at that particular point. So for example, if the inventory isn't actually open visible, we probably don't need the icon loaded. Similarly, if there isn't a particular item of that type in the world, then we probably don't need to have the mesh loaded. And similarly, we probably don't need the sounds loaded either for when it's hitting something. So yeah, so in terms of things like that, it's just something to be aware of, that it is good to use soft references in this particular stage. Again, this is just static mesh, sound base, static mesh, and then texture 2D. In regards to the weapon, we do have the additional one here, which is for a held item. This is just a base class that I've set up. There's nothing in it yet, it's just a type of actor. But I've set that up so it's in preparation for later on when we decide to create some held item classes. That's also a soft reference, because again, unless it's being held, it probably doesn't need to be loaded. Similarly, we also have supported ammo types. Chances are a lot of these will probably be loaded anyway in terms of classes, but this is a soft reference anyway, just in case we do have quite quite a few different ammo types, and they're not all going to be used. It kind of, yeah, it might lend us a little bit where we're not, there might be one or two ammo types we don't need to load because they're not actually being used. But so again, that is a soft reference. And this is, just to be aware, this is the base ammo class. So it's not a specific type of ammo, it's just the base class. So this is what we'll create children of. Again, that's a little bit on the soft references there. Now, again, a lot of these variables, these are private, and the reason why is because we don't want at any point to be able to actually change what these are. So things like the name should always stay the name. So what we kind of need to do is actually go through and set up possibly some getter functions for a lot of these. If there's anything that would change, then we'd probably need to set up a setter function as well. So what I'm actually going to do, I'm just going to spend a little bit of time just go through all of these classes. Again, I've not done anything fancy at this particular point. All I've done is created some base classes and some children on it, and just added variables for the data that these items will need. Now, it is important to spend a bit of time doing this because it will affect everything else that comes after it. So having a good foundation can really help improve the overall infantry system in the future. So as a quick example of a getter function, so this is in the item base. I'm just going to call this one get a name. I'll just do a return, drag the name in, just like that, and then we can make that a pure node as well. So there we go. So we have get name. Now, for some of you might be thinking, well, if I just make it not private, then I can just get it directly from here. And yes, you could, but what you don't want to have happen, let me just open up this one and just hide the inherited variables. So let's say this is the items that we've kind of got stored. Just get one at random. So at the moment, if I want to get a name, I have to use that function because the get name, the actual variable itself isn't there. Now, if I was to make this not private, I could come in and then get that name. But the thing is, I could also then set that name. And it's this setting that we want to avoid. Because again, we don't want that particular name to ever change externally, because we don't want some random thing being like, oh, I want to change your name. Because this itself is something that would cause quite a lot of, well, potentially cause a lot of problems. Particularly if someone who might not be as familiar with the system or anything like that does something, they could accidentally break it without realising, because they might, oh, well, if I can access it, then I can change it. So it is important to make sure that you are using private variables where possible and where appropriate. So again, if something shouldn't be changed externally, make sure it's private and create a getter function. Also, use categories. It would make your life a lot easier. As you can see, I have ordered all these into little groups and names. If we look at the current system and how that's being used, so if we look at the item, this is quite chaotic. It's difficult to know exactly what anything is for. Adding to that, none of the variables actually have any descriptions or anything like that, so it can be difficult to distinguish what something should actually do. Now, not everything needs a description, but it is a good idea to include one where possible. So if you notice on some of these, I've already added some brief descriptions, just because they can be extremely helpful. Especially if you're getting somebody new that's coming onto a project and they're not aware of how your system works. Having some descriptions can just help facilitate that a little bit. Sometimes what you can do as well, particularly with the functions, the function itself won't have a description like the variable does. So you can always just copy the description from the variable and just paste it into the function as well. And then that way there should still be a description. Although sometimes it doesn't show up until you refresh. Yeah, so now the name of the item, this can be used when comparing items if needed. So in terms of the things that we do have here, we have like the name, which is a variable type name. Now this is quite important, and I'll kind of go over it in a second. And we then have the display name, which is a text, description, which is a short description, and then we have a long description. Again, these two are text. Now the reason why having the name as a name type variable is quite important is because comparing names is actually extremely efficient compared to comparing strings. So if you're wanting to physically specify a name, using a name is usually your best option. It does give you a few other things. Well, you do have access to a switch, which again you can just type in some names, and then if it equals, in this case example, then it'll come off this pin. So again, there's quite a few options you can do with the name, and it's kind of the most efficient way to compare sort of text essentially. Now, in terms of display name and the descriptions, these are text because they will be displayed to the player. Now, it's important to make sure that if any sort of text is going to be displayed to the player, that you are using text where possible. The reason why is because text can be localized. So if you're wanting to release your project in different countries with different language options, then you're going to have to essentially localize. So to do that, it does have to be a text, unless of course you're coming up with your own solution. But if you're going down that route, then you probably already understand what I'm talking about. But localization can be quite a complex topic, so if you're not quite sure what you want to do, just make sure it's a text, and at least that option is available for you in the future should you want it. Now, generally strings, you could use strings in some of these cases, but again, strings can be quite slow when comparing them. Sometimes it's the only option, depending on what sort of thing you're doing. And in terms of text, they can't be localized, so you kind of lose that sort of ability. So again, just make sure that you are having a little bit of a think about how it is that you're wanting to do it. So yeah, so what I'm going to do, I'm just going to jump off now, and I'm going to go ahead and actually create a couple of getter functions and whatnot, and then I'll sort of come back to you and I'll give you a quick rundown. Again, as a quick reminder, I do have an infantry system tutorial on the channel that kind of goes over a bit more of a bare bones look at making this sort of infantry system that I'll be going through on this little journey. So yeah, we'll be back shortly.